Well, if it's okay, I am going to jump in, get us moving. Here we have this opening scene in John 18, which is in the garden. It's a familiar place where Jesus met with his disciples often. Our minds are called back to the garden in Genesis, where God met with Adam and Eve. And we have the new Adam now in this garden. The soldiers come to accuse, to apprehend with torches and lanterns and weapons. By this, we can assume they expected to find a man hiding in the dark, ready to run or to fight. But unlike the first Adam and his sons, he does neither. He stands in the open. He questions his apprehenders, and he declares, I am. He's 7 times in John declared, I am. And again, here, standing in the garden under the cover of night, he declares, I am. And we hear the echoes of John 1. In him is life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Commentators speculate about why the guards fell back, but I think, it's clear here that John, as a writer, he is equating their response with all of the other scenes where humans have come face to face with God. What do? They fall down. As he asks them again, who is it that you're looking for? And he declares a second time, I am. He is arrested. And we follow not just the narrative of his arrest, but the imagery of John, of exiting the garden as the first Adam did, towards decreation, towards confusion, towards violence, and ultimately towards death. In the same way that many times in John, we have seen him declare the truth of who he is against the counterfeits of the world through bread and light and doors as a good shepherd. In the same way that John 15 tells us that there are other vines, that Jesus is the true vine. John 18, in this text, we continue to see the theme of counterfeits. Maybe there are multiple gardens. There is the garden where Jesus is Yahweh, and there are the gardens of our own making, places of darkness and hiding and betrayal and violence. There are those kingdoms that belong to Jesus, and there are alternatives, the kingdoms that come from this world. The trouble with counterfeits, I think, is that they do often look like the real thing. They can look and smell and taste and sound like the real thing. We can really think that a thing is good and wise and will save us, when it may actually be the thing that causes us to lose our life. In 2009, there was a flight from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil to France, Air France. It was this large Airbus 330. It was a plane that was, at that time, automated so well that pilots basically only flew the plane for the takeoff and for the landing. And the rest of the time, the flight would be an autopilot. This was going to be a long-haul flight. It was about 8 hours long, so there were 3 pilots on the plane. They would rest in shifts, so there would always be 2 pilots in the cockpit. It was a pretty normal night. They had been flying for a couple of hours. They were in a little bit of turbulence, but nothing that they were concerned about. They had hit a dark spot in the radar so that where they had left in Brazil, they couldn't be seen on the radar anymore, and they couldn't be seen yet in France, but they still had the ability to communicate. So the captain who was on the plane, he turned over the flight to one of the first officers, a guy by the last name Bonin, and the captain went and began to take his rest. Within just a few minutes of the captain leaving the cockpit, they, in this turbulence, began to hit some weather conditions that caused speed sensors on the plane to freeze up. There are these things called pitot tubes that were engineered off of the outside of the plane. They had 3 airspeed sensors in them, and they were in such weather that ice crystals began to form on those air sensors, which meant that they couldn't get accurate readings of how fast the plane was flying anymore. It's about 2 a.m. in the morning. It's completely dark, the middle of the night. They've lost some of those readings. And the other things the sensor does is that it turns off the autopilot. So the alarm goes off and lets them know that the autopilot has been turned off. And they, as the pilots, have to re-engage and begin to fly the plane. Bonin, who was in charge at that time, he took hold of the gears. He began to fly the plane. And because of the turbulence, the plane began to roll. Because the plane was so big, it was really sensitive to correction and overcorrection. So he was trying to level the plane based on the gauges because he didn't have any sight. It was completely dark. They had no horizon to look at. But as he was focused on leveling the plane, he had began to pull back on his stick, which began to tip the plane upward and made the plane start to climb. They have no idea how fast the plane is moving. They don't realize that the plane is climbing. And as he keeps trying to get control of the plane, this is all happening within seconds. He begins to climb so rapidly. He's climbing at a rate 3 times as fast as you would typically climb, that the wings no longer have thrust. They're tilted too far up, and the plane begins to stall out. So they call for the captain. The captain comes in. He's wondering what the heck is going on. At this point, the ice defrosts. So they have alarms going off. The plane is trying to tell them how to correct the problem, but he just keeps holding the stick back, and they can't figure out what's happening. And the nose is pointed up on the plane, but the plane is falling down. And he keeps thinking that what we need to do is climb. And they're trying to figure out what to do, and it's hard for them to focus and to figure out what's going on. As the pilot, the captain comes in, he is trying to figure out what's happening. There, you can hear them saying on the recordings that they found a few years later, "We don't know what's happening. We've tried everything. We don't have control of the plane." And there's about 40 minutes of silence while they're trying to wrap their heads around what's happening. And then you hear the second co-pilot begin to yell, "Climb, climb, climb, climb." Bonin says, I've had it climbing for a while now. And at that point, the captain realizes what they've done, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the plane, that all they needed to do was put the nose of the plane down to stop it from falling. But they realized it too late. They had been falling at about 10,000 feet per minute. And by the time that the captain realized what was happening, they were within seconds of hitting the ocean. It was a plane with over 200,000 people that fell out of the air that night. And it took over 2 years for them to ever figure out what happened to the flight. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the plane. The pilot continued to do what he thought was wise. He continued to pull the plane up to try and make the plane climb, but the very thing that he thought he was supposed to do is the thing that caused the plane to stall. They experienced what some have called cognitive funneling. You know, they're there in the late of the night, the plane is on auto flight, but all of a sudden, they hear the alarm, they're alerted mentally out of their own autopilot and become so focused on this pressurized situation in front of them that the first officers couldn't pull back and create a mental model for what was happening. There was nothing wrong with the plane. And the captain, as soon as he had all the information, could see that, but they couldn't see it. They kept doing what seemed wise to them based on their limited vision until it was too late to undo it. Here in John, Jesus' kingdom is crashing into the kingdoms of our own making. It's disorienting. Jesus is inaugurating the kingdom, and people are bumping into him. They want to control him. They're shocked by this leader, by the authority and the audacity that they see in him. He is initiating an entirely new way of finding life, and John is highlighting the layers of counterfeit wisdom that are being relied on in the text. We have these 2 gardens. One garden that requires torches and lanterns and weapons versus the garden where God meets with his people in love. We have the high priests, Annas and Caiaphas, with empty accusations, fear of empire, and escalating violence, versus Jesus, who is our high priest, who has just finished making intercession for his people in chapter 17, and in chapter 19 will become the atoning sacrifice. We have the kings represented by Pilate, who represents Caesar and the empire of Rome, who will assert dominance or pass on responsibility, whatever it takes to ward off potential unrest. And then we have the counterfeit revolution represented in Barabbas. Barabbas, who is a rebel, whose name Bar Abbas literally means son of the Father, versus Jesus, the son of our Father. The rebel there versus the innocent one who will give himself instead of make war to offer victory. I do wonder if it's possible that players in this text really thought their course of action was wise and would save them. The priest, Pilate, maybe even Peter. I do think Peter in the garden, in his zeal, was a loyal friend who thought the right thing to do was to defend Jesus as the guards came to take him. And later, as he's laying low around the charcoal fire, Jesus predicted what he would do. And it's unclear to me if Peter thought he was being shrewd at first. And at what point did Peter realize that he was doing the very thing that Jesus had told him that he would do? I wonder really if Peter's choices or the choices of other characters in the passage would have even been considered wrong outside of Jesus as Messiah. Maybe the only thing that makes it clear that Peter is going to need to be restored in chapter 21, the only thing that makes his actions wrong in retrospect is chapter 20. The fact that Jesus does go to the cross, that he does go down to defeat death and Hades and rises from the dead and becomes king. Maybe Peter and the others, they were doing what seemed wise to them in light of the kingdoms of the world and the parameters of those kingdoms. And maybe it would have been the right thing to do if Jesus had not become king. I wonder if sometimes we make the best decisions we have with the info that we have, and it doesn't always turn out to be great or wise or good. Have any of you ever played with Chat GPT? Have any of you ever tried it out? Yeah. People in the office have definitely tried it out and had a good time with it. You can use this automated AI stuff to generate response emails, write wedding speeches, create lessons. I saw a post last night from a girl that I lived with in Ireland where a guy used it to write a rejection text that he was going to send to a woman he was taking on dates. It was pretty good. I read the response. I was like, it's pretty good. Ended with a smiley face even. AI, it's an algorithm. It finds patterns in writing and replicates them through automation. And they say the more content it has, the more accurate it'll be. One guy, he was tired of waiting on the next Batman movie. So he wanted to see if he could get ChatGPT and AI to help write a Batman script for him to hold him over until a new Batman movie came out. So he had the computer watch about 1,000 hours worth of Batman content and let it produce a script for him. And I just wanted to share with you how that turned out this morning. It didn't go well, so the movie didn't get made, but someone else saw it, and they decided they wanted to make a comic strip out of it. So we'll just read a few scenes. As it opens, Batman stands next to his Batmobile and uses the Bat computer. He's sometimes Bruce Wayne, sometimes Batman, all times orphan. Alfred, Batman's loyal battler, carries a tray of goth ham. Eat a dinner, mattress Wayne. The next one, Joker is a clown, but insane. Two-Face is a man, but attorney. What do we got? It is just you and I, the Joker, Bat versus clown, moral enemies. I am such a freak. Society is bad. You drink water. I drink anarchy. I drink bats, just like a bat would. Batman says something about how he's looking for his parents, but his parents are still dead. So at the end of the scene, there's a Joker. Joker gives him a gift. He opens it. It's a coupon. It contains a coupon for new parents, but it's expired. This is a Joker joke. Sometimes we apply what we think is our best wisdom. It doesn't turn out great. Maybe it's how we live sometimes. I don't know, maybe it's how we end up by charcoal fires, distancing ourselves from Yahweh. We gather the patterns of the world as we live and lead, and sometimes when maybe we are under stress or pressure or confusion or tired, or even in our zeal or our passion or our excitement, we find ourselves reacting according to the wisdom that surrounds us. We apply wisdom that leads us to protect ourselves, to build empire, to soften the edges of our strange life with Jesus so it seems more palatable to those around us. We apply wisdom that leads us to fear death, to lean towards violence as we defend our deeply held values. think the more we tune into the wrong wisdom, the more we cultivate gardens that Jesus is asked to exit, where the wisdom of God does not reign. We balance our wings to a dark horizon. We hold the nose of the plane in the air, thinking it should make the plane climb, but instead we find that we are falling towards our death. And I wonder, what are the gardens that we're cultivating? Maybe we're cultivating gardens that include money and power and prestige, or safety and security and belonging, or health or adventure, the good life, a good neighborhood, a good vacation, good retirement plans, good schools for our kids. Gardens that seem wise in our way of seeing things, and maybe even things that are good in and of themselves. Maybe even versions of something that God might want to give us. But it's possible that the gardens that we cultivate apart from Jesus will lead us to lose our lives. That the false gardens, they seem very, very good until chapter 20, until Jesus is actually king. Once that happens, it's clear Pilate is a fool, Annas and Caiaphas, they're complicit, and Peter is a denier, just as Jesus predicted he would be. We can really think a thing is wise and good and will save us. It might actually be the very thing that causes us to lose our life. So what then? If there's musicians, you can feel free to come up whenever you want. When we face turbulence in life, how do we respond? There is a way that we can try to make Jesus agree with us. We try to pull him out of the garden that he has cultivated and created for us into our plans and our solutions and our strategies and our way of seeing things, our way of feeling about things. Maybe there is this other possibility where we get to partner with Jesus to go further into his garden with him. When we go further in, we can't take credit for this garden because it's his garden. We have to abandon our wisdom for his wisdom. We have to figure out how to put down our swords. We have to let our lives look strange to the world as they take shape around his counterintuitive ways. And we have to figure out how to let the reality of resurrection actually lead us into an unexpected life with him. I think about the things that we face in life, us, our family, our friends, the people we lead in our microchurches, and I think about an example like cancer. You know, most of us will be touched by it at some point. Many of us already have been, whether it's been you or a family member, someone you know. There is a way that we can respond to disease like that, a way that we can feel, a way that we can treat cancer, ways that maybe are identical to the world. We could fear death, fear suffering. We can enter in with hopelessness, with blaming or believing God isn't present, or at worst, that he's somehow punishing us. But in the kingdom, I wonder if there is a way to enter into something like that is 100% human, but leans into the garden with Jesus and away from self-preservation and hopelessness and fear. There's a young woman, her name was Jane, who she became popular when she went on like one of those singing shows, America's Got Talent or something. Her name was Nightbird as a musician. She's a singer-songwriter, and she had really severe forms of cancer that began to eat up her body. And she blogs and writes a lot. And I wanted to read you a little bit of what she wrote in one of her blogs called God is on the Bathroom Floor. It will be a little bit longer, but it's okay. Bear with me. I won't read the beginning of the blog. She opens by describing this 30-day period where she spent a lot of time in her bathroom, leaning on the tile wall and curled up in her tub and laying on her bathroom mat. She says, I have had cancer 3 times now, and I've barely passed 30. I am God's downstairs neighbor, banging on the ceiling with a broomstick. I show up at his store every day, sometimes with songs, sometimes with curses, sometimes apologies, gifts, questions, or demands. Sometimes I use my key under the mat to let myself in. Other times I sulk outside until he opens the door to me himself. Call me bitter if you want to. That's fair. Count me among the angry, the cynical, the offended, the hardened. But count me also among the friends of God. For I have seen him in rare form. I have felt his exhale laid in his shadow and squinted to read the message he wrote to me in the grout. I am sad too. If an explanation would help, he would write me one. I know he would. But maybe an explanation would only start an argument between us. And I don't want to argue with God. I want to lay in a hammock with him and trace the veins on his arms. I remind myself that I'm praying to the God who let the Israelites stay lost for decades. They begged to arrive in the promised land, but instead he let them wander, answering prayers they didn't pray. For 40 years, their shoes did not wear out. Fire lit their path each night. Every morning, he sent them mercy bread from heaven. I look hard for the answers to the prayers that I didn't pray. I look for the mercy bread that he promised to bake fresh for me each morning. The Israelites called it manna, which means, what is it? It's the same question I'm asking again and again. There's mercy somewhere here, but what is it? What is it? What is it? I see mercy in the dusty sunlight that outlines the trees, in my mother's crooked hands, in the blanket my friend left for me, in the harmony of the wind chimes. It's not the mercy I asked for, but it is mercy nonetheless. I learned to pray a new prayer. Thank you. It's a prayer I don't always mean, but will repeat until I do. Call me cursed, call me lost, call me scorned, but that's not all. Call me chosen, blessed, sought after. Call me the one who God whispers his secrets to. I am the one whose belly is filled with loaves of mercy that were hidden for me. Even on days when I am not sick, on days when I'm not so sick, sometimes I go and lay on the mat in the afternoon light to listen for him. I know it sounds crazy. I can't really explain it, but God is in there, even now. I have heard it said that some people can't see God because they won't look low enough, and it's true. If you can't see him, look lower. God is on the bathroom floor. Bathroom floor wisdom is not the wisdom driven by empire. It is a wisdom from a garden where Jesus is Yahweh. And when we deal with things like disease and death, tragedy, addiction, an unmet expectation, a dream deferred, when we face political unrest, when we enter into an election season, when we're trying to figure out how to walk with a friend in failure, when they fail over and over again, there is a chance, like John Piper says, who wrote that book, Don't Waste Your Cancer. There is a chance in these moments to hear in our own groanings the hope-filled labor pains of a fallen world. There is an invitation to lay down the wisdom that we think will save us and journey deeper into the garden with Jesus. As Lucas comes to lead us in communion this morning, I wonder where are the places of stress and strain and confusion in your own life right now, or in the lives of people that you're serving or leading. Is there some wisdom that you keep applying that you think will save you, and it isn't working, and it just keeps leading you out of his garden? Ask Jesus this morning how to put the nose of the plane down. Is there something that you're facing, and really your response, it doesn't look much different than the world around us? I wonder this morning, how is Jesus calling you deeper into the garden with him?